Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Heather Payton, and I'll be your host. I'd like to start by thanking you all for joining us, taking time out of your busy schedule to have such an exciting topic at hand to talk about, continuous integration testing for SAP. Just a few things before we go ahead and get started. We will be recording today's call. We will send a link out to you following the event, along with links to some of the resources we'll be going over today. We will address questions at the end of the event. If you have a question, please use the question console over on the right hand of your screen. Go ahead and type your question in, and then we will address it at the end of the event. With that, we're going to go ahead and move to the next slide. And we're going to start the event with some questions for you now to learn a little bit about all of you out on the phone today. So we have our first poll question. Which CI server do you use today? Jenkins, Microsoft Visual Studio, Bamboo, TeamCity, or other? And I have a bit of a typo there, excuse me. And we'll let everyone get their responses in. And then I'll go ahead and share the results. Hope everybody's having a great day, getting some nice fall weather. And we'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. And it looks like we have mostly Jenkins users out there, with a lot using other. Definitely interested in hearing what that other may be. We'll go on to our next poll then. Does your organization use an ALM system? Yes, Micro Focus, former HP ALM. Yes, Tenaya. Yes, SAP Solution Manager. Yes, other, or no. And looks like the results are coming in quite quickly on this one with some clear direction and responses. How exciting. And we'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. And looks like we have mostly HP ALM and Solution Manager users out there, almost a 50-50 split there. Very interesting. And our last poll, sorry. Are you an existing Worksoft Certify user? Yes or no? And results are coming in very quickly on this one too. Guess I'm making these too easy. Okay, we'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. And looks like about 60% yes, 40% no. So welcome to our existing users. Thanks for coming to learn more. And welcome to those who have not used Certify yet and are taking a look at it. Okay, so that's it for our questions. We're going to move on now to the next slide here, where I'm going to introduce our presenter today, Chris Kraus. Chris, I'll turn things over to you then.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, and what we're going to talk about is continuous integration testing for SAP, thinking about shifting left our testing with continuous integration solutions. Now, this is probably an interesting topic because when we think about ERP packages, in many cases, we don't think about continuous integration. We're more about the deployment, because SAP did all the development, and you may or may not have customizations, especially in the cloud. So I think this will be a very interesting topic to kind of unwrap what is CI, continuous integration, versus Agile, DevOps, continuous testing, and so forth. So we'll first talk about, it's a continuous world. What do those things mean? Specific key considerations for continuous integration. How do we run our certified tests from the CI servers, and scaling them with Execution Manager, and then we'll go to QA. And I will do several demos talking about that. Okay, so when we talk about all these layers of continuous, what we're talking about is what's continuous integration, continuous testing, and one thing that happens a lot of times is understanding what these things mean. So one thing we don't do a lot in the SAP world is actually write the code itself. So we need to talk about what is continuous integration. Continuous integration is literally writing the application and the process of building the application and testing it. Continuous testing is how do we look at the larger workflows and test all those things. And then at the end, we want to actually get into our continuous deployment. We actually want to move those things across the environment. So there's always a lot of questions with customers about how does that work and how do these things interrelate, and that's going to be our focus. So continuous integration. This is literally where the developers are writing the code, right? This is where they tend to think in agile sprints, and they're going to write code, build the applications themselves. And one of the biggest things that's important is that they need to coordinate that work. So what they do is they focus on source control and triggering that to the build cycle. So when we mean developers write code, they could write, say, their Java code or ASP code. In SAP, the Fiori stack is based on Java, right? So they're going to write that code, and they're going to, in turn, check that into source control, and then that triggers off the build, or the compiling of the system itself, okay? So that's what triggers the CI server. And the CI server is things like Jenkins, TeamCity, Visual Studio, all those things like that. And that's what most people think of. Now, the trick is when we say build, they literally mean we're going to compile the code. That means build it, and then we want to get results back to the developer. Did you break the build? Did you have like a syntax error that broke something, or was there a dependency between two things that didn't work? So the continuous integration tends to be very developer specific. Okay? So the next thing is where does the quality come in? Because people think about builds need to be in under 10 minutes. Like, I want to keep my builds very short and sweet. So I want it to be able to compile my code and run my unit test within 10 minutes. So obviously that means your overall end-to-end test can't happen that quickly, right? Your overall quality can't. But what we think about in pure continuous integration is like first is the build of the code, so I compile it, I run my unit test, and unit test means my application isn't deployed. I may not have a database. I may not have my APIs. I'm going to stub those out and test units of code very specific to a small story. And then what we talk about is a second build. So Martin Fowler did a great job in his continuous integration white paper talking about what's the purpose of the second build. Well, the second build is where we actually start doing all of our end-to-end testing, things that take a much larger amount of time. So if you look at the larger ecosystem, there's lots of source controls out there. There's GitHub and Subversion, all those things. There's lots of test management tools, you know, Visual Studio, X-Ray plugins, you've got Panaya, all these different things are keeping track of requirements and versus the code and the deliverables. And that's typically where we keep our correlations or our test cases. Then what happens there, you have your defect tracking. Some people keep the defect tracking centralized and they're micro-focused or the Panaya. Sometimes they use a secondary system like Jira to keep track of those, and those lead back to the requirements. So basically, the CI server is sitting in the middle and hopefully providing data to these things. I write the code, I check it in, CI picks it up, I then do the compiling, the unit test, and then we need to look to our test management and say, what's our overall test for this feature or these requirements that need to happen, create our defects, associate them with the check-in, and then so forth. So it's a circular process that keeps happening. So the core principles of continuous integration is to keep everything under version control. So what they mean is everything from the developer's perspective. The developer is going to write the code, he's going to worry about dependencies, if it's like third-party libraries for database access, things like that. He wants to change this all there. The automatic build is actually what the CI server is doing. It's compiling the code to create the executables in the installer, okay? And then they run their unit tests. So unit tests are what developers think of very myopically. Is the little bit of code that I've written working correctly? You know, is 1 + 1 = 2? You know, as a calculation of a tax working correctly? They want to test as many things as possible, but traditionally, unit tests from the developer's perspective are not in the deployed environment. The app server isn't installed. The database, all the APIs aren't put in there. And maybe if they're doing small API testing, they've got a stub and making sure a consumer is matching the signatures, but it's not making sure that the data went from a UI all the way back to the database. Okay. Another key thing is commit early and often. The idea is the more often we commit our code, we have a smaller number of changes going into the compile, That means if something breaks, we have a small place to look for what broke, right? If you commit your code every day and something breaks, you know, okay, something I did today broke the build. If you wait 5 weeks, something I did over the last month broke the build, and it's much harder to find that. So the spirit of commit early and often is literally to keep the body of work smaller, so if things break, we have less things to look at, and most likely you remember what you did today, so it's more relative. Okay, build of each change is another thing. So when we talk about tasks and stories inside of Agile, do that, okay? Fix the errors immediately. Well, obviously that's probably a no-brainer. If you broke the build, everybody's going to know. So go fix it immediately, and that way, when you're in a shared environment, you can have all hands on deck to fix those, okay? Now, keep the build fast, and this is always that problem. You know, the best practices is keep it in 10 minutes. Quite honestly, I've never had a product that built in 10 minutes. You know, 20 minutes was amazing, and then another 5 minutes unit test, but I've had products that were so complex, you know, with multiple agents and Jenkins deployed, it still took 45 minutes because there was 4 million lines of code, right? But you want to keep it relatively fast. So the industry guideline is 10 minutes. I'd say 20 minutes would be awesome, right? And then the last thing is really important. Test in a copy of your production environment to see how your code works there. One big problem we have is it works on my machine. Developers said that, well, it works on my machine, and Q is like, well, it doesn't work on mine. And there's a reason for that. The environment is different. You know, you want to make sure that your databases, your message buses, your security fixes, your Windows operating system, your Linux patch levels, they're all the same in your tests as they are in production. So any environmental issues that cause your code to break are caught early. So what are the key considerations? Source control systems and change lists. You know, one thing people think about is, okay, I've got my code change, I have unit tests. Well, those things are easily correlated together. But there's usually no good mapping between the requirements and that change list and the test management system, right? Very advanced people have plugins to the requirements model that say, hey, this check-in happened, but that check-in just tells you, hey, here's the change list. But there's usually not a good mapping to your overall test management and the requirements. Usually the systems are decoupled. So what happens is developers can see change lists and their unit tests they know to run. But what happens when you have multiple teams working in parallel? They're checking into the same source control and CI is building it, and you've got larger test cases, your end-to-end test processes that everybody touches. How do they work together, right? So realize, you know, you may be working a small part of the problem, but there could be hundreds of steps along the way. And this is something that our customers call it all the time. Knowing exactly what to test and when a larger business process is really, really difficult. And it's because, from the developer's perspective, a task, code, unit test is highly correlated. But getting the requirement to the test plan all correlated and dynamically picking those is usually a huge issue. So what are our key considerations? Well, if we walk back to that concept of the second build, so in continuous integration, that's my first build. I get a change, it's committed maybe multiple commits a day, at least once a day. I run my unit tests to make sure that the little bits of functionality I'm doing are working well. But when you think about your functional regression tests, your security updates, your patches, how does that fit into your larger ERP packages and user experience? That's your continuous testing second build, right? So how does that work together? So when we think about our end-to-end testing, who owns that? Well, traditionally, that's where QA gets involved. And a lot of times, this is where QA thinks about continuous testing. How do I continuously test the environment? But in reality, in most companies, there's not a tight correlation between requirement, task, code, and your end-to-end test cases, right? So how do we manage that? Okay, we need a two-tiered approach. So basically, you've got your dark blue, that's our traditional development lifecycle. We're doing our continuous integration, we're doing continuous testing, we're deploying, we're looking for feedback. Well, notice we've got a second loop there for continuous testing. How do we think about applying our end-to-end test to all of our environments, right? So if it takes 4 hours to an end-to-end test and we're checking in often, we probably can't do that, right? So what we need to think about is for continuous testing, maybe we run those tests every 6 hours so we can reduce the number of changes. We'll learn from what they talk about of check-in often, so fewer number of changes. Instead of waiting for the end of the week to run all my regression tests or end of the day, maybe we schedule them to run 4 times a day because they take 4 hours. So this follows the concept of check-in early and often that allows us to do that. So what we can actually do is work with mean time to resolution and mean time to identification. The same concepts of finding broken build code apply to end-to-end tests. When you're continuously testing every 6 hours, you know the number of check-ins or number of changes has been minimized. And that reduces our time to identify and resolve those defects. Again, continuous integration, continuous testing. Now, they're better together. So this is the big problem. So if you're doing a very CI-oriented life cycle, and you talk about your second build, or if you're thinking about continuous testing as your second build, the problem is how do you correlate and start building all of those end-to-end functional tests? So what we're suggesting is you're going to have to work together. As stories are completed, or little bits of functionality, developers may write a unit test. If it's visualized in the user interface or something that is shown to the end user, we'll start building tests there. Now, quality teams are usually responsible for that. They think about the point of your the quality teams are thinking about this end-to-end functions, right? So what happens is we now need to start building those tests, but we need to deploy them backwards and shift left so that they're run as part of that continuous integration environment. So with Certify, we can run functional tests to make sure data is going from the screen to the backend systems, and there's correlation across there. There's also the concept of I have end-to-end business processes. You know, if I create an order, I have to fulfill it, I have to deliver it, I have to invoice it correctly. So developers in that first CI build cycle are doing very small unit tests, but they may not be persisting to the database, they may not be passing order numbers and deliveries across the life cycle. Quality people are thinking about the bigger pictures. So what we want to think about is if we build functional tests, and we build, some people call them string tests, some people call them end-to-end tests, and we make them available to be run as part of that second build, say every 6 hours, what happens is we'll start catching those interdependencies. A change in the sales order caused a problem in the delivery. Maybe something in the delivery changed a problem with the sales order or fulfillment, right? How do we deal with that? So that's what we want to catch, those end-to-end business processes. So think functional tests, actually getting data to the real systems, not stubs. Some people call them string tests, some people call them end-to-end tests. So with Worksoft, we have integrations to a lot of platforms out there. So obviously, we have integrations with Panaya, with Micro Focus, with Jira for defects. You know, we plug into Jenkins and ServiceNow, all these different platforms. So what we think about is how can we integrate. To do is we want to actually allow our certified processes to run, but maybe they're triggered from Panaya, maybe they're triggered from Micro Focus, maybe they're triggered from Solution Manager. A lot of people are using that, right? How does this work in the bigger picture? Okay, and then we want to make sure that we get our coverage of all of our different applications across the bottom through automation very easily. Okay. So Certify, this is where we're going to actually do our test creation and management. So in DevOps, I talked about how do we take these end-to-end tests, these string tests, functional tests, and make them available. So what I'm going to do is, as a developer, I'm going to start writing those end-to-end tests. Maybe they're functional tests, and I want to make them available to be run immediately. But I don't want to have a lot of overhead to do that. So what I can literally do is I can actually designate a specific folder inside of Certify. I'm going to drop those into there, and then I'm expecting those to be run every 6 hours as for a specific business process. Or maybe they're my daily regressions. I need to make sure they continuously run every time something changes in my environment. Okay? So what I'm going to show you is how to create these. We use some new features in Execution Manager to bookmark folders, and then we can actually look at our APIs. Okay. So the second build, so this is where we're actually going to run them. So this is where we're going to talk about QA getting involved in the build cycle and running them. So a lot of times there's a center of excellence to do that. So center of competencies, center of practices, a lot of people have found that even though they're distributing testing out, it tends to be developer-oriented, and what they need to do is actually bring that in line. So what we'll have is a handshake between UI tests and end-to-end tests, and we want to shift that left and run those in the second build. So in pure CI language, that's the second build. In reality, you could probably think of that as also a continuous testing environment. Okay, how does Execution Manager solve a lot of your problems? Well, one thing we find out is when we start building tests that they need a desktop, they need a UI, they need a browser. And yeah, there's some tools out there that say, hey, we can simulate a browser. But in reality, a lot of your end-to-end tests need Microsoft Excel. They need to go to Outlook. You know, they're very complex. So when we think about why would I use Execution Manager to run tests in conjunction with my CI server, first is for system access. You know, we want to make sure that we log into the system the same way the users do. We need to make sure that we actually log in and log out. We don't leave those things open all the time. Those are security issues. We can then orchestrate running those tests on different operating systems, because you may need to run them on Chrome browsers and IE and different Windows operating systems and devices. Okay, and then we can run them in parallel, because we want to run a vast amount of functional tests and end-to-end tests in 4 hours. We may need to run them on 100 machines to get them all done. And then the last thing is, a lot of times people, their build server is the status of the build and the unit test. Their ALMs, like Quality Center, Panaya, and Solution Manager, are their system of record for testing and quality. So sometimes we need to run those in those systems. So the results of the tests from a quality perspective are logged in those systems. Okay, so continuous Execution Manager is how we're going to support that. So this will allow us to schedule tests to run. We can run them locally or in the cloud. They can be on virtual machines or bare metal hardware. You can actually do some complex things to schedule them if you need to run them in specific order, and based on passing and failing, run different ones. So this is a very robust scheduler inside of here. And what's going to happen is we're going to trigger this off from our continuous integration environment. So the nice thing is, once these run, you'll get reports in Certify, or you may get these in your ALM solutions themselves. But this is how we actually make running the complex tests in parallel or specific sequences available to you. So the way it's going to work is we'll have our CI server. It's going to make a RESTful call to Execution Manager to run. Execution Manager then knows how to wake up agents, run the tests. These can be on-premise and remote labs, and get the results back. Now, sometimes we need to spin up 10 machines. Sometimes we need 500 machines to actually do this. But that's the job of Execution Manager. From the build server, all you know is you've made a request, and you have a callback to say, are you done? Is this completed? So Execution Manager is handling a lot of the environmental issues and the setup for you automatically. And that's why I talked about it. We log in, so it's secure. We can log into different machines based on the types of and versions of browsers and clients and operating systems that you need. Okay, so now we'll go to the demo. So, main screen. Okay, so first I'm going to show you is a certified process. So this all starts off by having a test case that can run. Now, there are a million YouTube videos out there that show how I do capture and run tests. But if we want to put this in the context of continuous integration, what does this mean? Okay, I have a functional test. I'm actually going to log into a system, and this is a fully deployed system. So that's why they're kind of referring to the second build. The first build is compiling, the second build is the deployed system. Now I log in, and I start walking through the application. So from this perspective, the end-to-end test is going to actually create validations at the screen. It's got fully deployed app servers, type in all the data and run. So this is actually certifying, creating a Fiori sales order inside of Chrome. Okay? So how I built this, look on YouTube. We've got other 101s that show you how to do this. But from the perspective of CI, I'm going to run this and see, okay, is my test running successfully? And that means I now have a good regression of creating orders from a functional perspective. So it looks like I got my sales order, and it's going to complete the test. So it's going through, my test will log out and clean up. And almost done. You'll notice in this test, I actually take a full cycle, so I don't have any hanging logins, and I'll close the browser and clean up. Okay. So this is running on my local machine. Okay. So this won't particularly help me when it comes to my continuous integration environment. I need this test to run kicked off from Jenkins itself. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I have a folder. I've got a hierarchy here, and I've got some tests that I run daily, and I've also got some tests that I run as part of my sales orders. So I'm going to go create a new test here. So I've got a test, and what I'm going to do is, as part of my regression test here, I'm just going to reference this one. So I tend to do this a lot. I'm going to take this test, I'm going to reference it, and now I'll save it. So now I have a test over here that's going to do a string test and verify my sales orders. Okay? So this is sitting in Certify, and over here in this folder, I've got 2 tests. Now, that's literally all I have to do from the QA perspective, because what's happened in the background is we've set up our continuous integration environment to know how to reference this. Okay. So if I come to Management Studio, inside of here, I have my Execution Manager configured, and I also have my bookmarks configured. And what you'll see is I have a Jenkins Daily bookmark and a Jenkins Sales Order bookmark. So the Jenkins Sales Order bookmark basically says, okay, look into the folder called Regress Sales Orders and run every test you find here. So this is something the administrator is going to do once and set up. And so they can set up bookmarks for individual processes or folders. The idea is we want to make this very hands-free so users don't have to deal with it. Okay? So in this case, I then have I have my Jenkins server. So if I go over into Jenkins, I'll see I have different things set up. So I have a build for Solution Manager. I have a build for running my daily bookmarks. This one happens to run at 6 a.m. every morning, so I get full regression of my environment. Looks like something's kind of wrong with my build. But I also have one for my Jenkins sales orders, right? So this one kicks off whenever I have my first build to my second build. So this Jenkins sales order is my triggered second build, right? So what I want to do is I want this to kick off running all of my processes, okay? So as my second build, I want my sales orders to get regressed. So I'll do a build of parameters and kick this off manually. And what happens is it'll start running, and we'll get some information over here in the console that it started running. So what's going to happen is on our Execution Manager, I'll use this to spy on my lab. So Execution Manager set up. Oops. Can't type my name. There we go. So I have resources. These are my remote machines, and I have multiple logins available. So what we'll see is it starts running my processes. Now this is one of the processes I just dropped in. Remember, I showed running the sales order over here. So what I'm expecting is, from a build perspective, every time I have a change to my, the developers make a change to the sales order process, my second build is going to start running my Certify end-to-end tab. So I can see over here, kind of in a remote spy, that they're running. So this is where we start talking about that handshake. This could be scheduled to run every 6 hours. Maybe this is scheduled to run as a trigger on the build. This is kind of a thing you have to figure out. If it takes you, say, 20 minutes to build your system and run your unit tests, and you do 5 builds a day, you have to decide how often do you want the second build to run. I think 4 times a day is probably a good, reasonable amount if you have follow this end developers. So every 6 hours, this could kick off and make sure everything's working correctly. So now I'll bring back to what is the difference between the first build unit test and the second build test. Remember, the first build unit tests are probably not deployed. You may have stubs for your APIs and that, where in your second build, you actually have a fully running system itself, okay? So I can see here, it completed. So I can see it failed. So again, my sales order string test, that one just ran, and then it passed. But I can see the second test, and my order to cash actually failed. So what I'm doing is every time I add a new certified test or process and I drop it in this folder, it's automatically going to get picked up by the build server and run. So this is great from the perspective of I want this results to be in the Jenkins. I've got the pass fail, and I've got every process listed. It's in a JSON document, so developers will love that. They know how to read that. But what happens when this is actually needs to be somewhere else? So sometimes, from a QA perspective, remember I said they're end-to-end tests, or string tests, or functional tests. Those things, they don't want them to run and the results in Jenkins. It's great that they're there, but their system of audit is inside of Solution Manager, right? And it turns out that 38% of the people on this call today said they're using Solution Manager for their step, right? We had a little bit more using HP ALM, and this will work for both of them. Now, what I've done here is I've kicked off my Solution Manager work list. So if I look over here and I spy into my machines, what I'll probably see is I can see a Solution Manager work list is starting to run. Okay, this was triggered from Jenkins, from my continuous integration. If I look at my resources, I'll see this process is starting to run. So this is probably interesting to people because it's something they don't know what happens. I'll zoom in. So what you'll see is we actually log in. We'll pass through the security, the connections, and so forth, and I'll launch Solution Manager. Now, what it is if I'm organizing all of my certified processes in Solution Manager as tests, what I do is I create work lists of tests. And my work lists are basically a collection of test plans that then have the associated tests. So what happens is I can now start running these processes over here. So it looks like I got a connection error, and it's pulling back and reviving from it. Okay. So what I'm actually doing is I'm running the processes from Solution Manager, so my results show up in Solution Manager. I can do the same thing with HP ALM and Panaya. Okay. So it looks like I got a connection error. So let me just go log into my Solution Manager. I'll see what's there. So from our perspective, what happens is we'll kick these off, and then in Soulman, I'll have all my results there. Yep. From the test suite overview, what we'll see is I have different tests, and they're passing and failing. So many times, our continuous integration environment needs to kick off into Solution Manager to give us all those reports, because this is our system of record. Okay? So it's like Soulman's, it's thinking really hard. This will come up in a second. But basically, what I want to talk about is what are the differences of who's consuming the results. Obviously, from Jenkins, he's going to see the pass and fail of these. I had a pass yesterday of these, and then early this morning had a fail. I've got other passes, so it looks like some of these tests are not passing in Solution Manager. Not surprising, we're seeing that right now. But this is where, yes, Jenkins is reporting the pass or fail. We know the exact processes, But the key is the system of record for audit needs to be over in Solution Manager. Okay, we support the same thing for ALMS. People want to merge together where they kick their tests off from continuous integration, but the auditing results need to be in ALMS. So we can support both models over here in Worksoft. Okay, there we go. So now we can see here's my test plan. These are all my test executables, the tests that exist. The other thing we can do is we can look at our work list. So as the testers do their work, what we'll see is the work list will give us the statuses of our processes over here in Solution Manager. Okay. So it looks like my Solution Manager connection is almost back up, so that test can keep running. So there we go. So it looks like they're ready to test, and these have been initialized, and we have some that have passed and some that have failed. So this is how we talk about how would you do continuous integration testing that include functional end-to-end tests that could be in Solution Manager, that could be in ALMS, or your results can be in Certify. Okay? So let's come back and we'll open up for questions. So that's what I wanted to demo. Sorry, my Solution Manager is running a bit slow, so we didn't see all of that on the spying screen.
Right, are you pulling up the deck or am I going to?
Good, back to the deck.
Okay, sorry, just 1 second, folks. We're going to be moving into the Q&A section again now, sorry. So if you have a question, please go ahead and type it into the Q&A console, and we will be addressing those. We did have a wrap-up slide, Chris, if you wanted to hit that.
Yep, so continuous integration is not enough. So a lot of people think of what am I doing with continuous integration? Well, obviously, I'm doing the compiling of the code, the validating of it, my unit tests. But the unit tests may not be easily correlated to your end-to-end requirements in your test plan. So that's where your second build, you're swapping your screen. Sorry. Your second build is causing us to need to do our end-to-end testing and regress those. So could those be your semi-automated acceptance tests? Well, yes, because those acceptance tests we run can give you document generation across there and show you everything that's happening. Is there a handover to the other teams? Well, yes. Well, we'd like to make that as seamless as possible. As people are building functional tests as their story is complete, and they just have to drop them in a folder and say, these are associated with the business process, and Jenkins kicks them off, or maybe they're daily tests and they run every 6 hours, that's great. So what we want to think about is how can we automate as much of the testing, not only the compiling, before we move to production. So this allows your CCV boards and those people are looking at that to, for it to be as seamless as possible.
Okay, great. And it looks like this next slide is very timely. We had a question here from John Paul on, can you provide some links on how to integrate Worksoft to ALMS? So John, here you go. We have on YouTube, our YouTube channel, we've got a number of videos for Micro Focus, ALMS, SAP Solution Manager, and Kanaya Dynamics. So these are links we'll include in the follow-up communication to all of you out there. Chris has also written some great blogs on the subject if you have additional questions there on how CI and CT work together and how Worksoft integrates with those. We also have loaded some handouts into the handout folder. I just want to let y'all know if you want to take a peruse. There's a great white paper by Paul Gerard on, how to talk about. Sometimes it's challenging when adopting DevOps and you have to explain to the custom app team, why end-to-end tests are different, why some of the practices for CI are different. So we've got a good white paper by Paul Gerard that kind of sets the stage for that conversation. Along with our SAP capabilities handout and a case study from Cardinal Health, who's had some tremendous success with test automation in their Agile journey. So we'll go to the questions now. Again, if you have a question, please go ahead and submit it into the Q&A panel. Our first question, Chris, do you have to use Certify to create your test with Execution Manager?
Yes. So Execution Manager knows how to run your certified tests. Now, that means we're assuming your tests can be end-to-end tests. You may need to test lots of technologies, mobile devices, browsers, fat clients like Outlook, Excel. We can also run API tests from Certify. So if you have SOAP UI tests or you have one in Postman, we can run those also. But yes.
Great. So our next question, if you don't have an ALM, what type of integrations with requirements and defect management systems do you have?
Okay, so we have integrations obviously with ALM, Solution Manager, and Hanaya. We do have a basic module inside of Worksoft for requirements, and you can associate a requirement to test cases and correlate them there. Most people look to something like one of these third-party tools if they're in a regulated environment, so they have auditors checking those. If you're not in a regulated environment, maybe you can use something just like a simple Jira plugin or what we have built into Certify.
Okay, we have a question here. I saw that in one of the slides there was a bullet point, run tests based on outcome of prior tests. How do you do that in Execution Manager?
So Execution Manager, when you schedule your tests, you can say that they run in a sequence or they run in parallel, or you can say based on pass or fail of the previous test steps. So if you list 7 tests in Execution Manager, you can specify the second one is based on the first one passing or failing, the third one is based on the first one passing or failing. So you actually do it when you schedule them in Execution Manager, and it's based on the pass or fail of a previous test.
Great. So we have a question. I can take that one. Will the slides be made available? If you would like a smaller version PDF of the slides today, go ahead and just respond to any of the reminder emails you received from Citrix, and I will get that and I will send you a copy of the slides. Okay. Is there any license requirements to implement CI/CD for existing Worksoft users?
Yep. So you just need licenses for Execution Manager and then your runtime licenses associated with it. So you don't need any extra licenses there, just whatever you have for your Execution Manager. You can make RESTful calls to it remotely to call it from any platform that you need.
Okay. Our next question will be, is there version and control for Certify? Also, what about Zephyr?
So
integration with Zephyr. Sorry, 2 questions.
Yes, 2 questions. So yes, we've actually added versioning inside of Certify. So there's an import-export mechanism that lets you pull say a test out. It's that process called a sub-process that has layouts and record sets and variables and dependencies. When you do the export, those are all pulled together into a nice zip file of JSON data. That can be put into a third-party versioning tool. Then we have the concept of merging that back in. So when you import an exported version, the merging allows you to pick and choose what you want to keep. If you want to keep different steps to different processes or sub-processes. And what you'll see is right now that you can take those zip files and version them in, say, an artifact repository or whatever. We will add that as a second in Certify this coming year, where you can keep those in the Certify database versus keeping them as external zip files. But yes, we can do versioning, and we have import-export. In terms of, I think, the Zappy, so we're actually looking at integrating into the Zephyr Zappy also. It will basically make calls to the RESTful interface into Execution Manager, run the test, and provide the results back. So the consistent way we're integrating to all these test management systems, because if they're cloud-based and your test lab may be in the cloud, your test lab may be local, what we do is we actually use Execution Manager and a remote call to it to kick them off. And so you'll see integration into the Zappy coming up at the beginning of this coming year.
And just a follow-on question, which version of Certify supports the new import-export of processes and version control?
10.1. So your 10.1 of Certify has the import-export and the process merge. There's YouTube videos on it out there, and there's also some information in the Worksoft community.
Okay, we have a question here. How does your solution for continuous testing compare to others in the market like Tosca?
Okay, so the big difference we have is we have the lab management. If you look at the way a lot of people do their testing, they're just running command lines from, say, Tosca just runs a command line. So the Windows box has to be already logged in and has to always be logged in. And you have to convince your security people to have a mouse jiggler so that the screen never locks and you get screenshots. Some people try to do this from, say, Jenkins servers or from Bamboo or TFS. And you know, if you don't have a coded GUI test in TFS, you have the same problem. Just running, you know, because you can run something with a command line doesn't mean the screen is unlocked, the right user is logged in, and then you'll get good screenshots. So most people, they say, yeah, they run from anywhere, but there's a lot of assumptions on the front end that your security team lets you leave Windows unlocked, running all the time, and the screen's never locked, so you get good screenshots. So we manage the machines for you. We actually do remote desktop logins. You can change the user login. So if you need to do security testing to say, do I have access to these menus with security user 1 versus user 2? You're not going to be doing that with other tools because they don't actually log in. They're just assuming the machines are always logged in. You're not going to get clean screenshots because we log in, we keep an active session, we log out. So if you're logged in all the time, most people's security don't let you run mouse jigglers to prevent the Windows, your screens from locking. So there's a lot of problems with just thinking you're going to run it from the command line. You need something in the management. We wrote Execution Manager 8 years ago because people had this problem. It is getting more strict. That's why we do all these extra bits for you.
Just to add to that, I just want to talk a little bit too about our native integrations with ALM solutions and our approach there versus some of the other products in the market.
Yeah, so with HPALM, we have integrations to the test lab. Now, you can kick off the test lab, and if you have HPALM's remote agents, those remote agents wake up, log in, run the test. We find that's pretty difficult to configure, so our Execution Manager knows how to do that for you also. So Execution Manager can run a Certify process, or it knows how to point to an HPALM lab. So we handle the logging into the machine, picking the right machine that has the right browsers and Windows operating systems you want to test on with the correct users for security. With HPALM, we actually log in, activate the test lab, let HPALM run the test, so all the report is in HPALM, and then we come back.
And it's all native, bidirectional,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a question here from Deepak about, do we have any webinars or training for version control? I can take that. Yes, we do. If you go to our YouTube channel and look at the videos list and look for the colorful lizard, our change chameleon, you'll find the change management videos there. Let's see, another question. That one I think is a little bit technical, and we'll follow up on that. I don't see any more questions in the queue at this point. So with that, we'll go ahead and thank you for joining us today. If we didn't get to your question, please let me know. A couple of these, I believe, are a little bit more technical. I'll forward to Chris after to follow up in writing so we get you more specifics. He may have some questions before he provides you an answer also on those. Again, we want to thank you for your time today. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording along with the resources. We have another event this month at the end of the month coming on testing SAP Success Factors, so you'll see that coming up soon. And with that, we'll go ahead. Thank you for joining us and wish everyone a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Thank you.